36. Pounder. The Great Pyramid at Giza is traversed by mysterious passages known as air shafts. During his exploration of the lower part of the air shaft leading from the so-called Queen's Chamber, Wayneman Dixon Diskoff aired 3 tools: this small stone pounder, a small wood board, and a copper object in the shape of a dove's tail, cat. Number 37. Now thought to be offerings dating to the age of Khufu, there were either genuine tools or models of tools and are similar to objects discovered in foundation deposits. They may have been placed in the air shaft at Giza to allow the deceased king to magically open the passage and return to heaven. Forked instrument. This object was probably attached to a wood handle. Sometimes identified as a sculptor's tool, it was more probably used to manipulate ropes, as were similar instruments from the Roman period. 38. King Khufu's cattle. On this relief block 3 cattle march sedately one behind the other. Of a fourth only the tip of the horn is preserved at the right. The animals are of a lean, long-legged breed with extremely long horns, which the artist has depicted in a beautiful lyre shape. In ancient Egypt such cattle were kept in herds that grazed on the open grasslands in the delta and at the desert margins under the tutelage of herdsmen who shared their half-wild life. In the tombs of officials of high status processions of cattle were a common theme. The animals were depicted driven to slaughter as offerings to the dead or being counted and inspected by the tomb owner in life. 3 In the royal monuments the cattle were shown either assembled among the booty from military campaigns or presented as offerings. Judging from preserved scenes, booty animals were often grouped closely together so that they overlapped one another. 4 Cattle in single file appear for the most part in the context of a presentation of offerings for the funerary cult of a deceased king. 5 Thus, the beasts in this relief probably belong to a scene of the latter kind. Elaborate names are written above the animals on the list block, a feature that is unique in known representations of this type. These names are difficult to translate, and scholars have advanced various fair signs of them. Godik tentatively translates the first name from the left as the tribute from Tefer belonging to Khufu, Tefer being the source of lapis lazuli. The second ox he calls the surrounding territory serve, Khufu. 7 And the third the surrounding lands act for Khufu. 8 Whatever these rather high-sounding appellations may signify in terms of literal meaning, they are strikingly similar to the names of the estates whose personifications frequently appear in rows and pyramid temples and causeways. Cat. Numbers 22, 41. Perhaps each of the dignified oxen represented an economic entity, such as a particular herd that Khufu had designated to provide meat for his funerary cult in eternity. Stylistically the cattle relief takes its proper place beside the fragment of a relief with the head of an estate personification from Liszt, cat. Number 41. The outlines of the animal figures are well rounded, and the modeling of the musculature is especially sensitive. Judging from finds in other pyra mid-precincts, this cattle defile could have been located at Giza, either in Khufu's Valet temple or in his pyramid temple. 9 The oxen would have been placed on a wall in the north half of one of these buildings so that their heads faced the pyramid. The relief was originally in 2 parts, which were subsequently joined at the middle of the center cow. 39. Man with the sunshade. Godik has convincingly demonstrated that this fragment, one found reused in the pyramid of the 12th dynasty pharaoh Amenemhat I, was originally part of the relief decoration of King Khufu's pyramid temple at Giza. 2 Indeed, it has the roundness and smooth surfaces typical of the reliefs of Khufu's pyramid precinct, cat. Numbers 38, 41, and shows many similarities with the fragment of an estate personification that carries the name of this king, cat. Number 41. The differentiation between the smooth surfaces of the man's body and the main part of the shade and the grooved wig, for example, is comparable to the play between areas of contrasting texture on the estate relief. The man grasps the pole of a lotus leaf-shaped sunshade, 3 which rests on his shoulder, and enough is preserved of another shade behind him to tell us that he is the first of at least 2 shade-bearers. Of an inscription on the right only parts of the hieroglyphs for Upper Egypt in protection remain, which are not sufficient to allow us to reconstruct the whole. Lotus leaf-shaped sunshades were customarily carried by attendants of the pharaoh in Old Kingdom Egypt, especially at performances of rituals. 4 We can assume, therefore, that the scene to which the Toronto fragment belonged involved a ritual and that a large figure of the king was depicted close by. The sky symbol with rather large stars that crowns the relief is a common feature in wall representations of religious character. The Toronto relief is one of only a few reused blocks from Liszt on which substantial amounts of color remain. The black in the wig and the dark red of the skin alone have survived, but the intensity of these colors helps us imagine the original impression that was conveyed when the traditional bluish-gray background and the probable green of the shade in blue and yellow of the sky were still in place. Woodcutter among trees. Ancient Egypt, although not rich in trees, nevertheless had enough wood to supply material for the manufacture of furniture, coffins, and many other commonly used articles. And although most ships of state were probably made from imported cedar, the overwhelming number of vessels that sailed the Nile must have been made of indigenous wood. No wonder that time and again Old Kingdom depictions of shipbuilding include scenes of lumbermen cutting trees for the men who make the boats. Often we see herds of goats that have come to feed on the foliage of trees, see entry for cat. Number 42, which are felled and trimmed by lumbermen and then transported to the shipyard. 3 The present relief block 4 comes from such a representation. It preserves only part of the uppermost register of the original scene and shows the leafy tops of 2 magnificent trees whose trunks must have been carved on the block below. Like the traditional figure of the pharaoh, the trees towered over 2 or more registers, in these registers their felling and trimming. And the eventual building of a ship, or ships must have been depicted. A man whose head and raised arms were carved on the block above strides with legs far apart and left foot lifted from the ground. He was undoubtedly engaged in a forceful action, probably the swinging of an axe over the fallen tree trunk whose end is visible behind his forward leg. As Dick has noted, the detailed depiction of the foliage is without parallel in Old Kingdom art. 5 Remarkable also is the liveliness of the plants. The tips of the branches at the left side of the tree nearest the man are more loosely distributed than those on the right, as if a wind was blowing them toward the left, and the central branch of the other tree is bent in an utterly natural way. There can be no doubt that a master sculptor was at work here. Taking this into account and considering that the original composition must have been of large size, given the remains of the trees that extended over 2 or even 3 registers, we almost certainly can assign the relief to a royal monument. There is also enough evidence to indicate that the monument in question belonged to the pyramid complex of Khufu at Giza. The roundness of the sculpted areas and their subtle relationship to the background, as well as the sparsely indicated musculature of the fully rounded limbs and torso of the woodcutter, firmly place the work in the same group of reliefs from Khufu's pyramid precinct that includes representations of a procession of cattle, a man with a sunshade, and the personification of an estate, cat. Numbers 38, 39, 41. 6. Assigning the woodcutter relief to the funerary complex of Khufu. Most likely the pyramid temple runs counter to the general belief that full representations of shipbuilding did not belong to the repertoire of scenes included in royal funerary structures. It is true that no monument from a royal funerary complex has a semi-large scene that is preserved, and it seems that in the tombs of officials depictions of woodcutters began to appear only about the time of Sur's reign, in the 5th dynasty. 7 Boat building, however, was already widely shown in the reliefs and paintings of the Maidum tombs from the time of Khufu's father, Sefru, cat. Number 24c. 8 And among the tantalizingly small relief fragments found near the site of Khufu's pyramid temple and upper causeway were some bits that indicate the presence of scenes with boats. 41. Head of a female personification of an estate. Like the scenes from Xing's Heb said, cat. Number 23. This fragment is from the group of Old Kingdom blocks that was reused in the core of the pyramid of the 12th dynasty King Amenemhat I at Lisht. Preserved here is the upper part of a female figure, a woman who carries on her head the cartouche of King Khufu resting on a horizontal staff or board with a feathery protuberance in front and 2 streamers at the back. From earliest times in Egypt, horizontal bars of the kind that carry the king's cartouche here were shown mounted on poles. Instead of hieroglyphs they usually supported sacred emblems. Such standards served at ritual and state functions to establish the presence of superhuman forces. 1 From the 3rd dynasty onward, not only sacred powers but also administrative entities such as the names were represented by images on standards. 2 And a similar device was used to denote royal agricultural foundations, usually called estates. In the latter representations, human figures were substituted for the poles of the standards, thus transforming each image into a personification of the estate. In place of the sacred emblem, the name of the estate's founder, most often a king, crowned the configuration. This name was inscribed in either a cartouche or the rectangular hieroglyph designating house or walled farmstead, cat. No. 22a. 3 The royal name was part of the estate's own name, and the rest of the word was written behind the figure. In the present fragment the estate name reads from right to left, perfect is Khufu. 4. The personification is female because the estate in question is a new, or village, a word of feminine gender in ancient Egyptian. 5. Old Kingdom estates were either villages of long-standing or new foundations established, some of them on recently reclaimed land, by a royal or a private owner. All were dedicated to provide in perpetuity for the funerary cult of the founder or for a temple. 6. The personifications of estates that appeared as rows of many figures, therefore, did not merely demonstrate wealth, they represented an economic reality and served magically to preserve this reality in eternity. Because of this magical function, it was important to provide a name with each estate personification. A comparison of the present Khufu estate figure and predecessors from the time of Snefru, cat. Number 22, reveals the considerable development of Old Kingdom relief art from the reign of the first king of the 4th dynasty to that of his successor. In the Snefru examples, the estate figures stand out sharply against their backgrounds. The relief surface is relatively flat, and all details are outlined with almost graphic precision. The Khufu figure meets the background with a rounded edge, except where the outline is straight, and as a result figure and background appear to be more unified. An overall roundness in the relief lends softness to the figure and the details, and there is a sensitive differentiation between the grooved area of the wig and the smooth skin and garment. Intricate detailing in the hieroglyphs and the double row pattern of the cartouche, compare cat. Number 176, are also notable in this fine royal relief, which probably once adorned Khufu's pyramid temple or the upper part of his causeway at Giza. 7. Since the figure would certainly have faced toward the inside of the temple, we can assume that this estate personification was placed on a wall in the south half of the monument. 42. Billy Goat. Goats are satisfied with all manner of plant food that cattle and sheep do not eat, and they adjust easily to dry climates. No wonder that herds of goats were kept routinely in ancient Egypt, and that many representations in tombs show them roaming the countryside with their herdsmen. They are often pictured under trees trying to feed from the foliage. But there are also images of mating goats, cat. No. Are 20, goats giving birth, in goats in rows in the open countryside grazing with their young. 2. As Godick has pointed out, the animal in this relief or fragment found at Lisch has an unusual twisted horn that differs from most other goat horns shown in paintings and reliefs. The usual horns have an undulating shape and are spread farther apart. 3. The closest parallel to the horns of the goat of the present relief appears in a fragment that was discovered in the debris of King Khufu's causeway at Giza, near the point at which it enters the pyramid temple. 4. The Lisch goat is, moreover, closely related stylistically to reliefs bearing Khufu's name, such as fragments showing a procession of cattle and a personification of an estate, cat. Numbers 38, 41. And all through the relief is well rounded and the sculpted areas rise smoothly toward their highest points. To be sure, the carving is somewhat higher here than in the 2 other examples. The head especially has an almost three-dimensional quality, with the eye deeply carved and the bones around the eye emphasized. There are, however, notable parallels in the treatment of the goat and the cattle. The skin and musculature between the front legs sag in like manner, and very similar elongated muscles at the base of the neck, and all the animals are indicated with shallow depressions. If the goat relief, like the cattle fragment, originally came from Khufu's valley or pyramid temple, the 2 scenes may have carried a similar meaning. The goat and its companion, 5, whose head is now missing, perhaps belonged to a row of animals representing the offering of meat in perpetuity for the cult in the king's temple. The goats must have been positioned on a wall in the south half of the building, whereas the cattle relief would have been placed in the north part of the monument. 43. Soldiers running with a rope. Like other fragments in this exhibition, cat. Nose. Row 5R and 7. This piece of a relief probably belonged to a scene with sailing ships and small companies of running troops. The figures here, however, are larger than those of the related objects. All were found reused in the pyramid of Amenemhat I at Lisch. Preserved in part in the present fragment are the figures of 2 men supporting on their shoulders a carrying pole from which a heavy coil of rope is suspended. Much of the body of the lead man is still visible, but only the forward arm and part of the breast of his companion remain. The first man grasps the pole with his left hand, while his right arm curves awkwardly. Behind him, his long fingers and somewhat thick wrists overlap the coils of rope. His legs are spread apart, indicating that he and his companion are running, a difficult task considering the instability of the load ball ants between them. The soldier wears an apron composed of 3 very short, wide strips, which are separated by incised lines. The left arm of the second man is draped over the pole so that the inside of his elbow rests against it and his arm hangs down. Like depictions of running troops dated to the reign of the 5th dynasty King Userkov, Cat. Numbers 103, 104. This fragment is rendered in low relief. However, stylistic features indicate that the work probably predates the 5th dynasty. The contour lines that define the rope bearers slope gradually toward the surface of the stone and are sharply outlined where they join the background. This type of surface treatment is characteristic of early 4th dynasty reliefs and suggests that the piece may have originated at the pyramid complex of Khufu at Giza. One in contrast to the relatively graceful proportions and poses typical of figures in early 5th dynasty works, the arms of these men seem thick and their contorted positions appear strained and uncomfortable. A close parallel to the composition of this piece is found in a relief from the tomb of Prince Khani Nisut at Giza, which probably dates from the 4th dynasty. 2. In this scene, where soldiers are seen running in front of a sailing ship, the lead figure swings his right arm over the pole while the second man grasps it with both hands. Given that Khani Nisut's tomb is located not far to the west of Khufu's pyramid, we are left with the intriguing possibility that the prince's artist copied at least one of the figural arrangements found in the temple of his royal ancestor. 44. Hemunu seated. Hemunu, as the colored paste inscriptions on the base of his statue tell us, and as this remarkable statue and his huge mastaba beside Khufu's pyramid testify, was one of the most important individuals of the Old Kingdom. Member of the elite, high official, vizier, king's seal-bearer, attendant to Nekhen, and spokesman of every resident of P. 2. Priest of Bastet, priest of Shesmetet, priest of the Ram of Mendes. 3. Keeper of the Apis bowl, keeper of the white bowl, whom his lord loves. 4. Elder of the palace, high priest of Thoth, whom his lord loves. Courtier. 5. Overseer of royal scribes, priest of the panther goddess, director of music of the south and north, overseer of all construction projects of the king, king's son of his own body. Heminu.t. The title king's son of his own body seems to have been used with some latitude. Heminu of Giza is generally considered to be the same Heminu who was the eldest son of Nefermat of Meidum. See entry. For Cat. Number 24. Himself a king's son. 2. As overseer of all construction projects of the king, Heminu would have directed the building of the Great Pyramid. His mastaba seems to have been built during the later years of Khufu's reign. When the statue of Heminu was found by Hermann Juncker in a serdab of Mastaba G4000, figures 109, UO, it was largely intact except for the face, which had been badly damaged around the eyes and nose, apparently by thieves digging out the inlays, particularly the casings of gold from the eyes. Fortunately, a reasonable restoration could be made from a number of fragments found in the sand filling the serdab chamber. 5. While the animation of the original eyes, probably rock crystal, could hardly be duplicated, their general shape was deemed recoverable. The line of the brow ridge seems to have been unambiguous, but the treatment of the eyebrows, a natural ridge rather than a plastically raised strip, was a decision of the restorers. The shape of the nose was recreated from traces of its original contours on the face and from the relief depiction of Hemi-Unu, Cat. Number 45, and is perhaps less satisfactory. Traces of color noted by Juncker indicate that the statue had been fully painted. Most remarkable, indeed inescapable, is the flesh that suffuses his form. The muscles are minimally modeled, as though they were slack and overwhelmed by the weight of the flesh. From the front, the great sagging breast and chest, heavy belly, and crushed navel are impressive. In side view, the effect of these features is magnified. The large breasts hang in great soft mounds. The folds of sagging flesh visible on the chest continue around the sides of the body in long, curved laps ending only on the back, as they do on extremely obese or very aged persons. At the same time, a slight discordance arises for the modern viewer. In fact, the extreme marks of obesity are applied as signs of importance to a torso whose mass is not really quite sufficient to justify them physically. Similar attention to indications of obesity can be seen in a few other statues. The scribe statue of Setka, son of Jadefer, Cat. Number 55, has the same crushed navel, while the scribe in the Louvre, figure 33, and the figure of P. Hernefer in the Louvre, NN8, has strikingly similar puffy skin, slack muscles, and distinctive laps of flesh running under the arms and onto the back. 7. It may well be that these statues, which exhibit a hyper-realistic modeling of flesh, belong to a school of the early to mid-4th dynasty. 8. The paste inlaying the inscription, here show unusual tones. Juncker noted that the original signs probably had the more usual colorations and that their present appearance is due to the loss of paste layers. 45. Relief of Hemi-Inu I's face. His high rank as prince, vizier, and overseer of all construction projects enabled Hemi-Inu to obtain for his burial a large mastaba at Giza, in the center of the cemetery west of Khufu's pyramid, the construction of which Hemi-Inu may have supervised, see entry 4, at number 44. Initially this mastaba too was the solid rectangular stone structure customary during Khufu's reign. However, when the original building was enlarged on all sides but the west, an elongated corridor was added to the east. This corridor housed two false doors, each in front of a serdab chamber, the northern one containing the magnificent statue of Hemi-Inu, cat. Number 44. Both the corridor and the doorway lead into were decorated with reliefs, of which a few fragments remain. 3. The present piece comes from a depiction of the seer tomb owner on the south, or left, reveal of the doorway. Preserved at the right edge is the face of Hemi-Inu, with traces of ridges representing the strands of his shoulder-length wig. Hieroglyphs in front of the face are part of the traditional offering formula, an offering that he king gives. The outline of a side of a loaf of bread at the left suggests that a prayer for 1,000 loaves of bread and 1,000 jars of beer, among other texts, once filled the space in front of the seated figure. 4. The remarkable qualities of the relief fragment showing Hemi-Inu become apparent when it is compared with faces from earlier reliefs, such as those showing Medjen, cat. Number 29, and Aakti, cat. No. R8. Both the Medjen and Aakti pieces are carved in the high relief common in the 3rd dynasty and the early 4th. The Hemi-Inu relief is somewhat lower but does share a number of important traits with these antecedents and works contemporary with them. For instance, all delineate the outline of the upper face in one way and that of the lower in another. 5. Forehead and nose above the tip are separated from the background by the same angular edge that was used in early Old Kingdom reliefs to set off not only faces but also other parts of figures, such as the torso, kilt, and legs. However, nostrils, philtrum, mouth, and chin curve smoothly into the background. In each of the earlier works the combining of these two techniques to delineate the face produces a well-defined profile and a soft, youthful expression around the mouth. The differentiation between Hemi-Inu's upper and lower face is carried out in a manner that is identical to that seen in the reliefs of Medjen and Aakti except for the use of a very thin edge along the upper area. The result is the image of a self-confident and determined person in whose face a bony, slightly curved nose contrasts with a faintly smiling mouth that is surrounded by soft, subtly modeled musculature. A strong, broad jaw ends in a round chin, leaving no doubt about the powerful will of this official. It is clear that Hemi-Inu's face exhibits a number of features reminiscent of sculpture in the round. Among them are the three-dimensional treatment of the eye, with its rounded eyeball, 6. The fine lines enhancing both upper and lower lids, the cosmetic line added to the outer corner of the eye, 7. And the faint but determined indication of the cheekbone. In view of the highly sculptural quality of the relief, it is understandable that scholars have repeatedly commented that its face and that of the statue of Hemi-Inu are closely related. 8. However, the two faces, although both unmistakably individualized, are not so similar. The pointed chin of the statue, for instance, is separated from the mouth by a rather long, flat area, whereas only a soft indentation intervenes between the chin and the mouth in the relief. And beyond such differences in detail, the Hemi-Inu of the relief is younger and less forbidding than the man represented in the statue. Perhaps their expressive characters are at variance because the relief figure was depicted seated at a table with offerings and receiving eternal sustenance, while the statue was lodged in a serdab as a representative of the living man. 9. Certainly the two works were made by different groups of artists. The vizier and overseer of all construction projects evidently commanded the best talents in both relief sculpture and statuary. The reserve heads of the Old Kingdom, a theory. Of all categories of ancient Egyptian sculpture, that of the so-called reserve heads, one must say, has always constituted one of the most puzzling. These limestone heads, found almost without exception in the Western Cemetery at Giza, and all apparently dating to the early part of the 4th dynasty, were so named by Hermann Juncker when he first encountered them early in the century. Ersatzkopf, in German, literally substitution heads. It was his theory, and it has been one followed by most scholars after him, that such stone heads were intended to take the place of the actual perishable Head of the person represented if it should be damaged in any way. The characteristics of this group of sculptures are easily described but have proved difficult to account for. In the first instance, they reproduce only the head and neck of a figure, making them quite unusual among Egyptian funerary statues, where the representation of a complete figure is for magico-religious reasons the norm. Secondly, they are not shown with coiffures of any sort, there being usually only an engraved indication of the hairline. And thirdly, the gaze of the person represented is somewhat raised from the horizontal, which is also unusual, although sometimes encountered in pharaonic statuary. 2 But added to these peculiarities, which are common to all of the group, are a number of other features that occur in many examples. The sculptor's treatment of certain of the facial features is not only odd, but odd in such ways that the variations from the norm must be explained away. The peculiarities were listed by Smith in his chapter on the heads in his work of 1946.3. They consist of 1. The appearance in some of the examples of deep cutting around the eyeballs, separating them from the lids to a degree unusual in Egyptian sculpture. 2. The occasional presence of a fine carved line around the roots of the ala of the nose, where the lateral portions, or wings, of the nostrils join the cheeks, emphasizing the joint in an unnatural way. And 3. A quite peculiar and equally unrealistic treatment of the philtrum, the groove down the center of the upper lip, which, instead of being a mere shallow depression, is rendered as a shallow trench with vertical lulls. This is so utterly strange both in terms of the marked naturalism of the portraits themselves and of the Egyptian sculptor's own tradition both before and after the period with which we are dealing that some explanation must be sought. Even stranger and more puzzling are the odd mutilations that many heads have suffered. Most noticeably, some examples have had a rough groove hacked in the back along the median line from the crown of the head to the lower end of the neck. Another mutilation visible on many heads is damage 2. Or complete removal of the ears. Oddly enough, in one or two of the examples where the ears are missing, considerable care has been taken to dress down and smooth the areas where they once were. Much ink has been spilled over the case-tine of the purpose of these heads, which seem to make nonsense of many of the principles we see, or believe we see, in Egyptian art of this or any other period. But any hypothesis that seeks to explain the pure pose of a discrete and clearly definable group of artifacts must surely take into account all extraordinary characteristics found within the group, whether or not these characteristics are all present in all members of the group. A theory was suggested by the present writer several years ago in which the reserve heads were seen as artists' prototypes of the type exemplified by the famous head, now in the Egyptisch Museum und Papyrussammlung, Berlin, of Nefertiti, and the other stone and plaster heads found in the renowned sculptor's workshop at Amarna. 3 In other words, they were models for the use of sculptors engaged in producing several representations of the same person. Whether in sculpture in the round or in two-dimensional art. 4 The peculiar treatment of the head's features was there explained as intended to facilitate the use of a successful molding medium. The one suggested was fine linen soaked in water with some sort of glue or size, the kind of medium later used for cartonnage masks and coffins to enable the sculptors of the royal workshops to produce copies in clay or gypsum plaster. Indeed, one such head in the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, 329, still has its left cheek partly covered with a thick wad of plaster, suggesting that a direct mold in gypsum plaster had been attempted and had proved a failure. This theory assumes, of course, that several copies would be needed, that statues would be worked on at various venues, and that the chapel relief carvers might make use of them as well. The highly individualistic relief portraits of Nefer and Hemianu from their Giza chapel suggest the artist responsible had prototypes of some sort to work from. 5. A related sculpture was also referred to in the aforementioned article by the present author. This is the famous bust of Ankaf, figure 32. This superbly realistic work, executed in limestone with a plaster coat of varying thickness, is that of a man of mid-to-late years, with a suggestion of a rather fuller figure than the usual Egyptian ideal. The ears, which had apparently been added in plaster, are missing. Unlike the reserve heads, it has been given a coat of red-brown paint. The eyes were picked out in black and white, but only traces remain. Unlike the heads, it was found not in a tomb shaft but in the inner room of the chapel of Mastaba G75IO in the Eastern Cemetery at Giza, where it had apparently been set up on a low mud brick stand. When it fell from its position, it crushed several pottery offering vessels, showing that, unlike the heads, it had been actively used as a focus for the funerary cult. Not the least of the problems surrounding the heads is that of their original location in the tombs in which they were found. This question has been lately much addressed, apart from the fact that the objects were mostly deposited somewhere at the foot of the vertical shaft leading to the actual burial chamber. Nothing very certain can be said on this point. 46. Reserve head. This head was discovered in 1904 during George Reisener's excavations at Giza undertaken for the University of California and sponsored by Phoebe Apperson Hearst. It was lying on its left side in debris above the canopic pit in the burial chamber of Mastaba G1203, Figure 3. A broken slab stela in the tomb's offering chapel identified the monument's owner as the overseer of commissions and director of Bowman Ka. 1R. Reserve head, cat. Number 46, as found in burial cham. Mastaba. G1203, Giza. Nefer. The head has sometimes been identified. Reserve heads. 7 Several imperfections in Fide is depicting Khan-Nefer's wife, but it probably represents Khan-Nefer himself. 2. Of all the known reserve heads, this is one of the most carefully finished and displays some of the finest modeling. 3. The hairline is shown around the entire skull, and the eyebrows are carved in low relief. The eyes, with long, tapering inner canthi, are crisply delineated. An incised line describes the natural fold of each of the upper lids, which bulge slightly above rounded eyeballs. 4. The lips are relatively thin, and the philtrum, indicated by a slight depressing beneath the nose bordered on either side by a fine ridge, makes only a slight indentation in the center of the upper lip, instead of turning down at the corners, as it does on many reserve heads. The mouth is entirely horizontal and suggests an almost beatific smile. 5. In 1904 only 2 reserve heads were known, one found at Dashur and one at Abusir. The excavators working at Giza at this time would not have expected to come across such a head and may have inflicted a number of small gouges on its right side during digging. 6. Unlike ancient damage, which has acquired the same buff-colored patina as the well-preserved surfaces, these abrasions are stark white, revealing the original color of the fine-grained limestone. The ears, like those of most reserve heads, seem to have been damaged on purpose. On each ear the outer edge has been chipped away, but the outline of the unusually long lobe and the decorative intersecting curve that defines the helix are still visible. The damage to the nose may be accidental, as broken noses are comparatively rare. On the surface appeared to have been filled with plaster in ancient times. The odd pattern of concentric fissures on the right cheek looks like plaster fill that has dried unevenly. The center of the left eyebrow was probably finished in plaster that has disappeared, and 2 large abrasions behind the left ear have traces of what seems to be ancient plaster. 8. Khan-Nefer's offering chapel was the typical simple mud brick structure built to surround a slab stela, Figure 14. 9 such chapels have no serdab, and one would not, therefore, expect to find statues associated with them. However, there is a pair statue in the Louvre, E6854-10, that is inscribed for a Khan-Nefer who has the same titles that appear on the slab stela in the offering chapel in Mastaba G1203. Stylistically, the statue is consistent with 4th dynasty sculpture from Giza and may well represent the owner of G1203 and his wife. It may also have stood originally in the offering chapel of G1203, II. Yet there are other possibilities. Professions were often passed from one generation to the next in ancient Egypt. Khan-Nefer's 2 titles are not particularly common, but they appear in inscriptions in several other mastabas in Giza, including G2150, which has a serdab and was probably used late in the 4th dynasty or even early in the 5th dynasty. The owner of G2150, another Khan-Nefer, may be a descendant of the Khan-Nefer of G1203.12. Khan-Nefer the Younger may have commissioned the Louvre statue to represent his parents or grandparents and place it in the serdab of G2150, thus allowing his forebears to benefit from his own funerary offerings. 13. It is also possible that the statue was moved from G1203 to G2150 after the funerary cult of the earlier tomb was discontinued. Reserve head. This piece is usually identified as depicting a woman because the features are perceived as delicate compared to those of many other reserve heads. However, when it is seen in profile, the prominent nose and jaw give an entirely different impression. In fact, like all but 2 of the known reserve heads, it presents no indication of whether a male or a female is represented. 1. Moreover, There are no inscriptions in the mastaba's offering chapel to provide a clue to the owner's identity. 2. The head is striking because it lacks any suggestion of a hairline, which on other excavated heads is outlined at least along the forehead. 3. The brow ridges have been sharply cut and end with deep depressions near the nose. The resulting shadows create the illusion of pencil-thin eyebrows, although none exist. 4. Above these ridges, on either side of the nose, the surface has been roughened where eyebrows would have been carved in relief. While the effect may not have been intentional, this treatment of the brows combined with the slightly downturned mouth produces a hint of a frown, in contrast to the smile of the Berkeley head, cat. Number 46. The eyelids are sharply cut, and the upper lids show an incised line. Undercutting along the lower lids accentuates the roundness of the eyeballs, which bulge from the sockets as is evident in a profile view and seem to be held in place by the upper lids. 5. The nose is straight and narrow and comes to a point at the end. The philtrum is bordered by sharp ridges and leaves only the slightest indentation in the full upper lip. The crisply outlined mouth is slightly to the left of Kenter. When the piece is seen from the side, it is apparent that the neck juts forward, unlike the neck of the Berkeley head, which is absolutely vertical. The chin of the prey, an example and of a number of others, is slightly raised, a feature that has led some scholars to assert that all reserve heads gaze upward. 6. However, profile views of this piece and nearly every other reserve head reveal that they look straight ahead even if the chin is raised. 4th Dynasty. The surface of this head has been carefully smoothed and is in nearly pristine condition, heightening the impact of the clearly intentional damage it bears. Although the most prominent parts of the ears have been chipped off, enough remains to suggest that they were not as large and did not lie as close to the head as the ears of most other examples. 8. The groove gouged down the back of many reserve heads is absent here, but there is a surprising injury to the nose. Whereas the noses of a few other reserve heads have sustained apparently accidental breakage at the tips, for example, cat. Number 46. The nostrils of this head seem to have been intentionally slit from the inside out, a form of defacement unique among the types of damage documented for these objects. 48. Reserve head. In any group of reserve heads this example would stand out, as figure 46 demonstrates. At 30 centimeters in height, with its long, broad face, the head is slightly over life-size and the most massive of the group. 1. The eyes, showing no line along the upper lid, are almost unique. 2. The nearly perfect condition of the piece, which reveals no intentional damage of the kind documented on most examples, is exceptional, particularly in view of the fact that it was found in a violently disturbed context. 3. When this example is seen in the company of other reserve heads, its resemblance to Egyptian representations of Nubians becomes apparent, although it shows none of the tendency toward caricature that marks later portrayals of Nubians. 4. At the same time it is nearer in its physiognomy to royal statues than are any of the other heads, by virtue of the shape of the face, with its high cheekbones and fleshy cheeks, and its round, wide-set eyes. 5. These features bring it especially close to the nice statue of Khafra, figure I-12. 5. However, in some respects this face differs markedly from Khafra's. For example, the unusually short nose juts out sharply and turns up at the end, allowing a full view of the nostril openings. 6. The fullness of the cheeks accentuates the nasolabial folds. The distance from nose to upper lip is remarkably long, and the philtrum makes only a slight, uneven indentation in the full upper lip. The two halves of the lip join in a sharp seam down the middle of the mouth, a feature found on no other reserve head. Although the head is in excellent condition, the surface has not been smoothed as carefully as that of other examples. Patches of plaster adhere to the helix of the left ear, and a trace of red paint is visible on the right. 1.7 The ears slant backward slightly and are set quite close to the head. The brow ridges have been subtly modeled to arch above the wide-open eyes, but the eyebrows have not been sculpted. There is a clear indication of the hairline across the forehead, but this disappears toward the temples, and the sideburns are not outlined. This head was found with another in the single shaft of mastaba G4440, and George Reisner concluded that they represented the Egyptian owner of the tomb and his Nubian wife. Reisner's identification was based on a series of seemingly logical assumptions, that G4440 belonged to a man, that both heads were originally placed in this mastaba, that one head must represent the male owner of the monument and therefore the other had to depict his wife. These assumptions, however, are based on faulty reasoning. First, although the majority of identified Giza tomb owners were men, a number of the core mastabas in the West Urn Cemetery belonged to women. 8. Second, There is no evidence that this mastaba was intended for more than one burial, and the owner's spouse, whether male or female, could have been entombed in a neighboring mastaba. Third, neither head displays any features that indicate the sex of the subject. In fact, had this head been found alone in the shaft, Reisinger would undoubtedly have identified it as the male owner of the tomb. Why there were two reserve heads in Mastaba G4440 remains a question. The simplest answer is that one is intrusive, having been thrown in with debris from another mastaba, perhaps G4450 to the north, which contained no reserve head. 9 As the heads were found lying close together near the bottom of the tomb shaft, surrounded by debris containing broken pottery and fragments of a limestone sarcophagus, figure 113, this seems a reasonable assumption. Which head belonged to G4440 is a matter of speculation, but the exceptionally good condition of the example illustrated here suggests that it was handled less and, thus, is the one more likely to have originated in this tomb. Reserve head. Hermann Juncker found this piece in 1914, by which time more than a dozen reserve heads had been uncovered. It was lying on its left side at the entrance to the passage leading from the shaft to the burial chamber of Mastaba G4350. Juncker identified the head as representing a prince, although the tomb contained no inscriptions or other material that might offer information about the owner. Some years later, William Stevenson Smith described it as the beautiful head of a princess. One as in most other examples, no element of the head indicates the sex of the subject, and the finely formed features and well-proportioned profile could as easily belong to a man as to a woman. The planes of the nose are quite angular and almost unfinished looking, especially in comparison with the other features, which are rather finely modeled, and the rest of the surface, which is carefully smooth. The hairline has been carved in very low relief across the forehead and around the sideburns, disappears over the area of the ear, and is indicated with an incised line across the back of the neck. The preserved outlines of the missing ears indicate that they were well placed in relation to the facial features and were normal in size. The brow ridges are softly modeled, but no eyebrows have been carved. The upper and lower lids of the almond-shaped eyes have similar curves. An incised line bounds the entire length of each upper lid. The eyeballs have been modeled, but the profile view reveals that they are quite flat compared with those of the other reserve heads in the exhibition. Cat. Numbers 46 to 48, and slope markedly from top to bottom, this inward slant, by no means unique among reserve heads, is more exaggerated here than in other examples. The mouth is very symmetrical, with upper and lower lips of the same fullness. The lips are well defined but not as sharply outlined as on some heads. The philtrum is marked by a soft R on either side and makes only a slight indentation in the upper lip. This head exhibits more damage than the three other examples in the catalogue, some of it probably accidental, some undoubtedly intentional. Most of the gouges in the surface and the breaks on the neck are most likely due to rough handling inflicted when the tomb was robbed, whereas the pitting on the left side of the face was perhaps caused by some element in the soil in which the head lay for thousands of years. The missing ears, however, were removed with extreme care, indicating a well-considered, intentional act rather than an accident or random vandalism. The same is true of the line that is deeply scored along the top of the head and becomes fainter as it extends down the back of the skull to the break in the neck. Although it has been suggested that the groove is a sculptor's guideline, this seems unlikely because it appears to have been cut after the surface was carefully smoothed and, moreover, is slightly off-center to the right on the top and curves even farther to the right in the back. The removal of the ears and the gouging of a groove down the back of the skull are the most widespread forms of intentional damage inflicted on reserve heads. Neither type is universal, however, nor do the two always occur together, as is clear from the examples in this exhibition, one of which has almost perfectly preserved ears and three of which have no groove at the back of the head. Princess Nefret Ayabet? Representations of women are relatively rare in Old Kingdom statuary. Tradition has it that this pretty statue was discovered at the same time as the slab stela showing Princess Nefret Ayabet, Cat. Number 51, a member of King Khufu's family. The results of Montague Ballard's excavations at Giza were never published, and it is not known whether the statue was actually found near the princess's mastaba. But no stylistic argument has been advanced to contradict that assumption, and the work can safely be dated to the beginning of the 4th dynasty. The young woman is sitting on a cubic seat, hands flat on her knees, and it is easy to see how her body was cut out of the original block of stone. Her sheath dress, suggested only by the indication of the lower border above the ankles, envelopes. A stocky body with very simplified modeling, no details show through the fabric. The neck is short and the head is set almost directly into the round shoulders. The ankles and feet are very thick. The sculptor has focused all his attention on the heavy, energetic face. The eyes are strongly outlined, the nose is broad and thick, and the mouth is strong and slightly asymmetrical. The chin and cheeks are pronounced. 51. Slab Stela of Princess Nefret Ayubet. This delicate stela is one of the so-called slab stelae from Giza. At left is the traditional scene of the funeral meal, on the right is a list of fabrics. The whole decoration is bordered on four sides by a relief band. Nefret Ayubet, wearing a long strided wig, dressed in a feline pelt, and adorned with a choker, arm bracelet, and ankle bracelet, is seated on a stool with bull's legs, decorated with a papyrus umbel. Her left hand is placed on her chest, and her right is extended toward the offering table laden with loaves of bread. Above the table, food offerings are depicted, a full leg of beef, ribs, a basket surmounted by 3 grains, and fowl. On either side of the foot of the table, a formula is inscribed naming the offerings the deceased woman will enjoy for eternity: 1,000 loaves of bread and jugs of beer, 1,000 head of cattle and of game, 1,000 fowl. At the level of Nefret Ayubet's chest the ideogram for illustration is visible, and in front of her face that for libation appears. Above her are her title and name, daughter of the king, Nefret Ayubet. The text inscribed above the table record the ritual offerings: incense, oil, green and black eye paint, figs, wine, cakes, and carob. The fabrics noted on the right side of the stela are no doubt related to mummified katyn. The different types are listed by name, Idimi, Sachet 1A, and then by quality and quantity. This work has been dated on the basis of its very special style and its provenance, the ancient heart of the Giza necropolis. The same mastaba yielded a statue that also probably depicts the princess, cat. Number 50. Given the location of her tomb near the Pyramid of Khufu, Nefret Ayubet is undoubtedly the sister of the great pharaoh. The extreme freshness of the colors: red for the pupils of the eyes, animals, and loaves of bread, yellow for the skin, feline pelt, and seat, green for hieroglyphs, and black for hair and details can be explained by the fact that the stela was protected by masonry that was added later. Nefret Ayubet's stela is one of the best preserved of such works. The wafer-thin relief and the simple carving, primarily concentrated on the face, show a return to the traditions of the age of Djoser. Shapes are indicated by an outline circled with a brushstroke, and volumes are suggested by the slightly convex surface that gently blends into the background. The princess's countenance, with its protruding forehead, small, straight nose, and delicately rounded lips and nostrils, expresses a new softness, and a radiant femininity emanates from the body wrapped tightly in a feline pelt, a femininity found also in the statuary of the 4th dynasty. See cat. Nose. So, 83. 52. Slab stela of Prince Wep.M. Nefret. This magnificent stela showing Wep.M. Nefret owes its extraordinarily fine state of preservation to a slab of stone that was set against the decorated side. In 1905, some 4,000 years later, archaeologists found it still in place, figure 114. This good fortune has made it possible to admire not only the artist's brilliant palette but also his delicate touch, which carefully describes the iridescent plumage of a bird, the marbled skin of a frog, the detail of basketwork, and the colored grain of an exotic wood. Here, as on all the slab stelae that have been recovered, see cat. Numbers 51, 53, the deceased is depicted seated in front of a table laden with bread. He is wearing a rather unusual medium-length wig, a moustache, and a short beard. Like Princess Nefret Ayubet, cat. Number 51, he is dressed in a long feline pelt, attached at the shoulder by a ribbon. 5 columns of hieroglyphs arranged above the table and to the right of it list the offerings necessary for survival: incense, green eye paint, unguents, wine, bread, beer, fruit, and all sweets. On the right, 3 falcons, each perched on a separate standard, introduce the list of various fabrics he will have available for eternity. The 2 columns of text inscribed at far right, the horizontal band above, and the line over the image of Wep.M. Nefret give his identity. This is a very important personage, a prince, overseer of royal scribes, chief of the Tens of the South, admiral, and priest of many deities, such as the frog goddess Hecate. In addition, He owned the largest tomb and cemetery 1,200 at Giza, and his stela is exceptionally large. But his family connection to Khufu is not as clear as the excavator George Reisner suggested when he identified core areas 1,200, 2,100, and 4,000 as cemeteries belonging to three different branches of Khufu's family. 1. It has recently been suggested that Wepen Nefret was the husband of Nefret Aibet. 2. Both her sons were royal, and their mastabas are very close to each other. By a happy chance, theirs are the best preserved slab stelae, and this exhibition has made it possible to compare the two works, which are among the most beautiful and most accurately dated from the Old Kingdom. 53. Slab Stela of Nefer. The cemetery west of Khufu's pyramid at Giza has yielded no fewer than 15 slab stelae, either whole or in fragments. 1 Except for Nefret Aibet's cat. Number 51. The first to be discovered, all were found during excavations conducted by archaeologists George Reisner and Hermann Juncker. They come from the largest mastabas, where in each case they were fitted in on the south end of the east facade. In 3 cases they were found hidden behind a limestone slab that protected the decorated surface. 2 A small offering chapel of unbaked brick, built against the east facade of the mastaba in front of the stele, figure 2.5, was the principal cult site of these tombs, whose superstructures did not have any other decorations. In addition to the evidence they provide regarding the evolution of funerary customs during the 4th dynasty, when for a brief period all other decoration disappeared from private tomb chapels, the slab stelae are particularly interesting for the history of Old Kingdom art. They date to the reign of Khufu and occur in the same context as reserve heads. See Reserve Heads by Catherine H. Rohrig in this catalog. Because the relief carving is of exceptionally high quality, it is probable that they were gifts from the king. 53. Slab Stela of Nefer. The cemetery west of Khufu's pyramid at Giza has yielded no fewer than 15 slab stelae, either whole or in fragments. 1 Except for Nefret Aibet's cat. Number 51. The first to be discovered, all were found during excavations conducted by archaeologists George Reisner and Hermann Juncker. They come from the largest mastabas, where in each case they were fitted in on the south end of the east facade. In 3 cases they were found hidden behind a limestone slab that protected the decorated surface. 2 A small offering chapel of unbaked brick, built against the east facade of the mastaba in front of the stele, figure 2.5, was the principal cult site of these tombs, whose superstructures did not have any other decorations. In addition to the evidence they provide regarding the evolution of funerary customs during the 4th dynasty, when for a brief period all other decoration disappeared from private tomb chapels, the slab stelae are particularly interesting for the history of Old Kingdom art. They date to the reign of Khufu and occur in the same context as reserve heads. See Reserve Heads by Catherine H. Rohrig in this catalog. Because the relief carving is of exceptionally high quality, it is probable that they were gifts from the king. This stela comes from the tomb of Lady Nefer, where one of the blocks bore a mason's mark naming Khufu. In its theme and signs and in the arrangement of the decoration, it is very similar to the stela of Nefret Aibet. Nefer is seated in front of a table laden with bread, her left arm on her chest and the right extended toward the offering table. The hairstyle, fine profile, and stole are the same as Nefret Aibet's. Only the clothing is different. Nefer wears a sheath dress cut low on the chest. The list of offerings, arranged in columns above the table and at its feet, is shorter than Nefret Aibet's. But the fabrics listed at the right, probably used in mummification, are of better quality. To modern eyes the difference between the two works lies essentially in the almost complete disappearance from Nefer's stela of the vivid colors that once highlighted the delicate relief. Plain fact, deterioration has set off the exquisite work of the sculptor, who with consummate mastery played on the imperceptible undulations of the surface and the simplicity of the outlines. 54. Head of King Jafar. The site of Abu Rawash, located a few miles north of the pyramids of Giza, was excavated by the French Institute of Near Eastern Archaeology, IFAO, in neighboring Cairo, between 1901 and 1924. With the exception of a Coptic convent, the ruins date to the beginning of Egyptian history. An archaic period necropolis of the 1st and 2nd dynasties was discovered there, as was a non-royal cemetery with tombs from the 3rd and 4th dynasties and the tomb of Pharaoh Jafar, Khufu's son and successor. Unfortunately, Jafar's enormous pyramid had been largely demolished by Cairo entrepreneurs, who came in search of high-quality stones and took away the fine limestone of the casing as well as the red granite of the temples. According to an early 19th century observer, Up to 300 camel loads were removed every day. Using the most recent technology, Eiffel and University of Geneva teams have recently uncovered an impressive sloping shaft leading to the unexplored burial chamber. Thousands of terracotta jars and small dishes have also been found, attesting to the cult the sovereign enjoyed. No doubt other surprises await excavators in the years to come. In 1924, archaeologists discovered a series of magnificent works adorning the funerary temple. Among them were works received by the Musée du Louvre, this head of Pharaoh Djedefre, a statue of Prince Setka, son of Djedefre, represented as a scribe, cat. Number 55, and a very beautiful female torso, probably Neferhetiti's, daughter of Djedefre, year 2628. There are only 4 known portraits depicting Djedefre, including this example, which is the largest and sculpturally the most accomplished. However, more than 20 statues once adorned his funerary complex and his pyramid. Archaeologists discovered fragments of them, piled into a large boat-shaped pit. The recent resumption of excavation has allowed a tenacious legend to be put to rest. Their destruction was not the act of the king's successors, who for some unknown reason sought to eradicate the memory of Djedefre. Burr was the handiwork of quarriers of the late period who were seeking constructine materials. The king is wearing the royal headcloth, called nemes. This plain example is bordered on the forehead by a flat band, which is indicated by 2 incised lines, the upper one displaying some corrections. In the canter of the band the royal cobra, or uraeus, rears up with its hood extended. There is no detail on the very broad central band that delineates the snake's body. The tail is coiled along the top of the king's head in a sinuous S-shape. In back, visible on the right side of the statue, the nemes extends into a lappet, the angle of which suggests that this head belonged to a sphinx and not to a seated or standing figure of a king. The face, whose bone structure is visible under the flesh, is rectangular. The left profile clearly shows the stone bridge that supported the false beard. A painted black line extending from the temples to the chin indicates the strap that attached the beard to the king's face in real life. The fairly large ears are carefully detailed, although the stylized antihelix has no fossa. The inner canthi are emphasized with a horizontal line, and the upper eyelids are rimmed with an incised line, while the lower lids are in slight relief. There is no trace of the cosmetic line, which, according to the excavator, encircled each eye and extended toward the temple. Seen from the side, each eyeball, still bearing the traces of an iris in black paint, does not display a regular curve. The lower eyelid, recessed in relation to the upper lid, delimits an oblique, slightly bulging surface. The eyebrows, treated in low relief, are highlighted in black and follow the curves of the upper eyelids. The thin nose, which has been damaged, is separated from the mouth by a very marked philtrum. The wide, full mouth is encircled by a sharp ridge that does not end at the corners of the lips. A vertical incision divides the lower lip in the middle. The lip is puffy and recedes slightly. The extraordinary rendering of notable anatomical features, the receding line of the chin, strong jaw, high cheekbones, full mouth, and structure of the forehead perceptible under the taut skin gives the work a sharp expressiveness that is tempered by more subtle notations, such as the depressed signs under the eyes and the puckering of the muscles at the corners of the mouth. This likeness of Djedefre is very different from the impassive images of his successor, Khafra. 55. Setka, eldest son of King Djedefre, as a scribe. The first scribe statues appeared during the 4th dynasty. They represent the sons of kings as scholars who have mastered the complex use of hieroglyphs and gained immortality by composing literary works. 2 This is the pose assumed by Setka, King Djedefre's son, whose statue was found at the foot of his father's pyramid at Abu Rawash. In an unusual assembly arrangement, the granite statue with a hole in the semicircular base is fitted into nested pedestals, the interior made of wood, the exterior of limestone. Each pedestal has a hole through the center. Presumably a peg was inserted through the holes to hold all 3 parts together. The prince is sitting cross-legged, his hands on his knees, holding an unrolled papyrus. Much of its writing surface blends into his plain kilt. A short titulary designating the figure as eldest son of the king, Setka III, is inscribed on the papi. Rus, complemented by the text carved in the limestone pedestal, eldest bodily son of the king, unique associate of his father, Setka, son of the king, lector priest of his father, governor of the palace, Setka, member of the elite, son of the king, initiate of the mourning house. The same method of inlaying hieroglyphs was used on the statue of Hemino, cat. Number 44, and can be linked to the decorative techniques employed at the tombs of Nefermot and Meni.4. On Sekka's lap, the papyrus stands out in slight relief, and its rolled end is firmly clasped in the scribe's left hand, placed palm up. The thumb and index finger of the right hand are joined, as if grasping a brush, suggesting the act of writing. But the sculptor went no further. There is no sign that a detachable element was fixed to the fingers. Viewed from the front, the statue can be envisioned within an isosceles triangle, with the wood pedestal forming its base. The side view reveals that the work tilts noticeably backward. Sekka has his head lifted and is looking up. His face is round, with a low, sloping forehead, a thick nose, and eyes flush with the head. Eyebrows are not marked. Characteristic features are carefully observed, the depression under the eye and puffiness around the eyelids, heavy cheeks set off by the deep furrow between nose and lips, and round chin. Like Campari-san, the sculptor has taken little care in rendering the mouth, which has undefined outlines and turned down corners. The medium-length wig, which leaves the ear lobes visible, is flared, and the locks are divided by a central part. The head is attached to the shoulders almost without transition. 3 rolls of flesh around the torso and abdomen indicate the scribe's plumpness, which is accentuated by the careful modeling of his fan-shaped navel, sunk deep into a fold of fat. The arms, separated from the trunk by wide fissures that give the illusion of depth, have received detailed treatment. The upper arms curve slightly to show the smooth shapes of shoulder and biceps, below the sharp bend at the elbow. The almost flat surfaces are broken by the protrusion of a muscle. On the right leg, the musculature of the calf and the ridge of the tibia are individualized. The statues of King Khafra. More than 100 statues may originally have adorned the funerary complex of King Khafra at Giza. Some have come down to us as undamaged masterpieces, but most have been reduced to humble fragments of alabaster, quartzite, and orthosite gneiss, black granite, or schist. The first and most spectacular find, which included the famous seated statue of Khafra with the horse falcon in the Egyptian Museum, Cairo, figure 28, was made by Auguste Mariette in 1860. This trove of statues was found in a shaft dug in the vestibule of the Valley Temple of Khafra's pyramid. 17 works, complete or fragmentary, appear in the Cairo Catalogue Generale, but many fragments have not been published. The expedition headed by Ernst von Siegelin in 1909 RC discovered royal heads in the remains of statues, some of them inscribed, lying for the most part in the debris at the south entrance to the Pharaoh's Valley Temple. Different sections of the non-royal necropolis explored by archaeologists Hermann Juncker, George Reisner, and Salim Hassan have yielded nearly 50 fragments from workshops. A few pieces from old collections such as the MacGregor collection should be added to them. The royal funerary complex was thus crammed full of statues of very high quality, executed in the most diverse materials. The definitive study of Khafra statues is still the one published by Reisner, who also studied the sculpture of Khafra's successor, Menkaure. Reisner was able to distinguish between 2 workshops, that of Sculptor A and Sculptor B. The first, true to tradition, worked in a severe style 3 characterized by more extensive modeling, especially around the mouth, eyebrows with an accentuated arch, inherited from the archaic period, and a preference for an ideal type rather than a realistic portrait. The style of the sculptors of the second school, who may have been younger than those of the first and who worked for a longer period, is characterized by gentler modeling and a more realistic rendering. Further distinction has been refined by William Stevenson Smith, who takes into account variations in treatment resulting from the nature of the stones used and who observes that during the same reign the shape of the eyebrows could be completely different from one statue to the next. King Khafra seated. This splendid royal statue, portions of which are restored, was found in 1860 by Auguste Mariette's workers. Along with other statues, it had been thrown into a pit within Khafra's Valley Temple. This king, a son of Khufu, succeeded his brother Giza under obscure circumstances. Khafra's pyramid was the second constructed at Giza, and the Great Sphinx, built next to his pyramid complex, CCAT. Number 30, is thought to reflect his features. In this statue Khafra is seated on a low throne. Its sides are decorated with the same Atawi, which combines the hieroglyph Sama, union, and the symbols for the 2 lands of Egypt, each land represented by a plant, the papyrus for the north and a flower for the south. This motif is a reminder that the union of the 2 lands created Egypt and that the king is forever the guarantor of the country's unity. Simply dressed in a finely pleated chendi kilt, the king is wearing a Neme's headcloth surmounted by a uraeus, which is carved nearly flat against the headcloth. A false beard, like the headcloth in the uraeus, an attribute of his office, is attached to his chin. His left hand lies flat on his knee, and his right fist is closed around an enigmatic object. Khafra's well-defined musculature conveys a strong sense of power. On the front of the seat, to either side of his legs, two symmetrical columns of hieroglyphs give the king's titulary, in addition to Khafra, his Horus name, user Ib. This piece is part of a group of about 20 similar statues, many of which were found in fragmentary condition. The most remarkable of these, sculpted in gneiss and housed in the Egyptian Museum, Cairo, places the king under the protection of the god Horus, depicted in the form of a falcon spreading its wings around the king's neck, figure 2.8. It is easy to imagine the majestic effect produced by these statues, the emplacements of which can still be seen in one of the halls of the Valley Temple. They were lined up between granite pillars and illuminated, so that their dark mass was reflected in the alabaster floor. 57. Fragments of a royal head. These three connecting fragments of a royal head were discovered east of the pyramid of King Khufu and debris above mastaba G 7102. They come from a statue similar to the famous gneiss figure of Khafra in the Egyptian Museum, Cairo, figure 28, which depicts him seated on a high-backed throne with the Horus falcon standing behind his head. Its wings spread protectively along the sides of Anem's headdress. Are the bird's tail and right leg and wing are visible in the photograph above, as are part of the king's right shoulder and the back of his pleated headcloth. A number of statues belonging to Khafra were found broken up in the area east of the Great Pyramid, and these three pieces may belong to a representation of this king, who commissioned various life-size alabaster figures. However, since the fragments were uncovered in the vicinity of Khufu's mortuary temple, it is equally possible that Khufu was the first Egyptian king to be depicted in Kai's powerfully symbolic pose as the living Horus. This possibility is supported by an image carved in relief on one of the limestone fragments uncovered in R 938-39 by Salim Hassan while he was excavating Khufu's mortuary complex. 2 The scenes depicted on these fragments relate to Khufu's said festival, and one preserves the back of the king's head covered by an early form of the Khat headcloth. A tiny Horus falcon, perhaps a piece of jewelry, is attached to the cloth where it is tied at the back of the king's neck. Head of King Khafra. This life-size head was discovered in the rubble of the Western Cemetery at Giza, at the northeast corner of mastaba G5 330. Found with it was workshop debris, including some fragments bearing the cartouche of Khafra. 1 The face of the sculpture is broader than most representations of this pharaoh. The sovereign is shown wearing the Neme's headcloth, of which only the plain headband, executed in high relief, survives. In the center of the band, which is almost flush with the eyebrows, is a uraeus cobra with a flat body. The king's curved eyebrows are treated like ribbons. The eyes are very large, with relatively flat eyeballs, and the inner corners are emphasized by a horizontal incision. The upper lids are rimmed, and a cosmetic line, sculpted in relief, extends to the temples. The fleshy nose is, unfortunately, mutilated. The wide and slightly smiling mouth is completely encircled by a clean ridge. A piece of the strided false beard survives at the chin. The head as a whole is majestic, and the striking stylization of shapes in there. Treatment as simple, rounded forms justifies George Reisner's attribution of the piece to the workshop of sculptor A. To the statue, particularly the eyes and eyebrows, was probably enhanced with color, to judge from the remains of blue-green paint on a similar work in the Romer and Pelizaeus Museum, Hildesheim, 5415. The delicate modulations of the flesh found on another fragmentary alabaster head of a king, cat. Number 60, are absent here. TB slightly translucent Egyptian alabaster. Terre chosen for this work seems to have been much in vogue during the reigns of Khafra and Menkaure. Representations of Khafra in this medium include an undamaged statue discovered in Memphis, which depicts the sovereign seated, Egyptian Museum, Cairo, CG 41, an impressive mask, larger than life, from the King's Valley Temple, 3 in the face in a more vigorous style, housed in the NY Carlsberg Glyptotek in Copenhagen, Cat. Number 59. Not to speak of numerous fragments, many of which have never been published. Face of King Khafra. This piece and another face of Khafra once in the collection of the Reverend William McGregor, Cat. Number 60, were said to have been found in the area of the King's Pyramid complex at Giza. The face is preserved from the frontier, almost to the lower end of the ribbed beard. The upper part of the face is relatively open, with a good distance between frontlet and brows and with wide eyes. The cheeks are long and smooth, with slight indications of musculature around the nose and mouth. Neither the underside of the nose nor its juncture with the face is clearly modeled. The upper lip shows a sharp central dip from which the top edges of the lips form straight diagonals out to the corners. The wide, curved lower lip gives the mouth a mild expression. 60. Fragmentary Face of King Khafra. This piece, once in the collection of the Reverend William McGregor, was said to have been found at Giza in the pyramid or temple of Khafra along with the more complete face in Copenhagen, ascribed to that king, cat. Number 59, in 2 fragmentary mace heads bearing names of Khafra. Dense Egyptian alabaster was used for many of the statues from the Khafra pyramid complex. This piece, carved in an almost marble-like stone with only a slight translucence, preserves part of the left cheek, part of the nose, mouth, and chin, and the root of the royal beard. The surface is very fine and the modeling delicate, the flesh thickens where the nose abuts the cheek above the nasal ala, and there is a pronounced muscle over the upper lip that appears more faintly below at the corners of the mouth. The mouth is small, and its lines are more curved and delicate than in many depictions of Khafra. The shape of the lower lip, which is narrower than the upper, breathes closer to that of the face in Boston, cat. Number 58, than to that in Copenhagen, cat. Number 59. Head of King Khafra. This little masterpiece has been reconstituted from 6 scattered fragments discovered in a 100-meter strip in front of Khafra's pyramid temple. The context in which the work was discovered, the style, and the material and orthosite gneiss, one known as Heffron's diorite, leave no doubt about. The sovereign's identity, it is, in fact, Khafra. The pharaoh is wearing the Neem's head cloth. The brow band stands out in relief against his forehead, revealing his natural hair at the temples, and above it rears a delicately sculpted uraeus, symbol of kingship. The arched eyebrows are treated as wide ribbons. They extend to the temples, following the cosmetic line, which emphasizes the external corners of the eyes. The upper lids are rimmed and the eyeballs extremely convex. The nose is straight and fleshy, differing from that of the seated statue of Khafra with the Horus falcon in the Egyptian Museum, Cairo, figure 28. The slightly sinuous mouth is prominent. The shape of the cheeks, which swell beneath the eyes, is particularly understated and refined. The Nar-row beard is ridged, and the profile view reveals it is attached to the neck by a bridge of stone whose triangular form is characteristic of the 4th dynasty. To George Reisner attributed this extraordinary head, which exudes majesty and serenity, to the workshop of sculptor B. 62. Small head of King Khafra with the red crown. Although small, this royal head has an impressive presence. The subject is a pharaoh wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt and a horizontally strided beard, which is attached to the neck by a bridge of stone. The face is broad and square. The eye sockets are inlaid with white stone held in place by copper cells, now very corroded. The inlays representing the corneas had already disappeared when the head was discovered. They were probably inserted by the same technique used for the statue of Kai, cat. No. Youthful, and the scribe in the Louvre, figure 33. A peg, visible on each temple, held the eye inlay in place. The eyebrows, which, like the chin strap, were once emphasized by a black brushstroke, are indicated by brow ridges. The ears are broad and curved, with a particularly well-developed lobe. The nose is unusually short and its wings are framed by very pronounced grooves. The crown and the upper part of the face are carefully polished and display only light parallel streaks, but the area around the wide, horizontal mouth shows large chisel marks. The red crown is set very low on the forehead and the base circles around the ears. On its flat top are vestiges of a copper rod, an element of the real crown frequently depicted on reliefs but seldom seen in statuary. The extremely short nose, the inlaid eyes, and the unusual crown have led some specialists to rule out the association with Khafra, whose features have been preserved in many statues. A very late date has been proposed for this piece and for a statuette of Khufu in the Egyptian Museum, Cairo, J36143, which is similar to it. But the site at which it was discovered and a number of elements argue for an early date. The inlaid eyes are attested in royal statuary since the time of Djoser, and a magnificent statue of him, figure 29, now displays only empty eye sockets. The method used to hold the eyes in place was employed for a series of statues from the Old Kingdom whose date is still in dispute, including the famous Sheikh el-Buld, figure 34. 2. Although fairly rare in statuary, the red crown first appeared during Khufu's reign, Egyptian Museum, Cairo, J 36143, and a few fragmentary examples have been dated to the reign of Khafre. 3. Finally, although it has not been possible to establish a definite connection between this head and two fragments bearing the cartouche of Khafre, 4. The similarities among the pieces are arresting. The provenance is the same, the type of limestone is identical, and the scale is similar. 63. Small head of a king, probably Khafre wearing the white crown. This beautiful piece, whose inherent monumentality belies its small size, shows the head, proper right side of the neck, and most of the high white crown of a king. A protuberant stone element at the back once connected it to a high slab, possibly representing the upper part of the back of a seat. 1. The crown fits the head tightly, leaving only the ears free. Its simple lower edge embraces the king's forehead, curves around the templus, and clings to the neck. Lay in front of each ear is a small rectangular slot below which the rounded and partially flattened end of the crown extends toward the face to cover part of the cheek. The king wore a round ceremonial beard attached to the tip of his chin. Horizontal indentations on the front of the beard created the impression of wavy hair. Part of the uppermost indentation is preserved. The face is remarkable for its austerity. An expression of openness and clarity is conveyed by means of the dominance of two main axes, maintained by the emphatic carving of the elements disposed along them, the vertical that runs from the bridge of the nose to the chin and beard, and the horizontal formed by the ears, eyes, and nose. Features outside these axes, cheeks, chin, and neck, are only sparsely modeled. Most expressive are the mouth and eyes. The mouth is surrounded by a sharp edge, the so-called vermilion line, inside which the lips are softly rounded. The straight chin rounds gently into the lower lip, and the mouth owes much of its fullness and sensitivity to the delicate forward thrust that results from the small curve. A slight groove delineates the muscles above the upper lip at both sides of the damaged philtrum. The king's eyes below their brows in shallow relief look straight ahead, their wide-open gaze enhanced rather than diminished by the oxidized state of the copper margins of the lids. The piece is doubtless closely related to the small head with the red crown in Leipzig, cat. Number 62. Both are made of dense limestone of the same consistency, although the material of the present head is less reddish. And they are almost identical in size, as well as in the technique used for the eye inlays, and both the eyelids are secured from behind by wires whose tips emerge through holes in the temples, where they were attached with patches of plaster. The facial features differ only slightly. The Kelikian head has ears that are less fleshy and more closely attached to the skull, a beard more rounded in front, and a leaner, more elongated face. Moreover, the area around the mouth is not reworked as it is in the Leipzig example, and the execution is more sensitive, with more delicate rendering of features such as the ears and mouth. Despite these distinctions, the heads are so similar that we may say they were surely made in the same workshop, although by two different sculptors, which accounts for their variations. We can also conclude that the heads were probably placed in the same sanctuary, namely the Valley Temple of Khafre at Giza, where the Leipzig example was discovered. In her entry on the Leipzig head, Ziegler rejects the various arguments previous scholars have invoked to show that that piece is not contemporary with the reign of Khafre. Her position is correct in the view of this writer, and it is reinforced by the links between the Leipzig and Kelikian works. There can be no doubt that the Kelikian head was made during the 4th dynasty, and the form of the mouth in particular points strongly to its identification as an image of King Khafre. Moreover, a comparison of the Kelikian head with the head in the Metropolitan Museum that indisputably represents Khafre, cat. Number 60, suffices to demonstrate the striking similarity of the two pieces, particularly in the area around the mouth and nostrils. Another royal head, that of Khafre's immediate predecessor, Youthful, in the Louvre, cat. Number 54, is also remarkably close to the Kelikian piece. They are connected by the shape of the ears and the mouth, and above all by their strongly axial structure. Both images present the pharaoh as a superhuman being who roars over ordinary men and women by virtue of his rigorous clarity of vision and an austerity untouched by mortal fears or desires. It is conceivable that the small statuette of Khafre to which the present head belonged was created early in the king's reign, and by a sculptor with connections to the artist who produced the Louvre head of Youthful. 64. Head of a queen. This small head probably represents a queen of the 4th dynasty, who may have lived during the reign of Khafra, since the head was discovered near his pyramid. The broad face is framed by wavy hair falling very low over the forehead and parted in the center. The lids above the large eyes are emphasized by cosmetic lines extending to the temples like flat ribbons, and the sinuous eyebrows are treated in the same fashion. The lower eyelids form a pronounced edge. The wide nose has been mutilated. The straight mouth with full lower lip is delicately modeled. The ears, large and broad, stand out against a smooth surface that represents the body of a vulture, whose wings stretch over the woman's temples. The bird's head is barely visible above her hair. Throughout Egyptian history, vulture headdresses were traditionally worn by queens and many goddesses. In the Old Kingdom, this attribute was apparently reserved for use by queen mothers, one who played a particularly important role. 2 For example, Queen Ankh-Nesmariah is depicted in a 6th dynasty statue with a headdress, holding her son Pepi II on her knees. Cat. Number 172. But the motif occurs in the 4th dynasty as well. In addition to the small head, the mortuary complexes of Khafra and Menkaure have yielded remnants of wigs adorned with the same decoration. 3 They are the only remaining vestiges of now lost queen statues. In fact, there are very few Old Kingdom statues depicting women of the royal family. 65. Cast of an architrave of King Khafra. The present object is a cast of a red granite architrave made in the 4th dynasty and reused in the entrance corridor of the Pyramid of Amenemhat I, 12th dynasty, about 1970 B.C.E., at Lisht. The original architrave, figure N6, is located so deep within the structure that it cannot be removed. The front of the architrave is inscribed with the horizontal cartouche of Khafra, which reads, "The King of Upper and Lower Egypt Khafra, son of Re." The inscription was deliberately damaged, probably before the blocks were used in the pyramid. At both ends of the block are remains of 2 seated falcons with cobras in front of them, forming the top of the vertically written Horus name of the king. The Horus name would have continued on the piers that supported the architrave. The extreme left and right ends of the architrave also include 2 flying falcons facing outward and rendered in shallow and sized lines. These remains suggest that the architraves lacked a continuous inscription and that the pattern of cartouche is flanked by the Horus name and 2 flying falcons either repeated or alternated with another, unknown text. Rick recognized that the architrave was originally part of the court of Khafra's pyramid temple at Giza. The court was surrounded by a sequence of 16 narrow doorways and 12 wide piers with over life-size seated figures of Khafra inset into them. According to Rick, the architrave bridged the doorways between the piers. He also suggested that representations of flying falcons faced toward and protected the royal statues, see figure 20. Small discrepancies in the measurements of his reconstruct time can no longer be addressed because of the poor state of preservation of the temple. A more cautious evaluation would therefore assert that the architrave belonged either to that court of Khafra's pyramid temple or to a similar locale in another, unknown temple. 66. Group of archers. This relief fragment, which was reused in the pyramid of Amenemhat I at Lisht, shows one of the most intricate groups of figures extant from Old Kingdom art. Close examination reveals that parts of 5 archers are preserved on it. We see 2 complete heads in the center of the carved area. The slightly upturned forehead, eye, and nose of a 3rd man appear at the bottom edge below the head of the man on the right. The outstretched arm and the hand above this 3rd head belong to a 4th man, whose figure is otherwise lost. At the extreme right edge of the fragment the hand and arrow of a 5th man are visible. Of the 2 arms below the head of the archer on the left, the upper belongs to the 2nd man with a complete head and the lower belongs to the 3rd archer. Thus the group originally consisted of at least 3 men standing in a row, one behind the other, and another archer kneeling in front of them. All the men hold longbows with arms stretched out straight in front of them at shoulder height. Each grasps a bow shaft between his thumb and the last 3 fingers of his left hand, one while the index finger keeps the front section of an arrow in place. With his right hand each archer draws the string of the bow, with the notched end of the arrow set against it, toward his shoulder. The bowstring is held between the thumb and the index finger of the right hand, and the arrow between the index and second OND fingers. The thumb of the same hand also holds 2 reserve arrows. The bows are of the simple type, self-bows, most prevalent during the Old and Middle Kingdoms. 2 The arrows have a tapering conical point and are split at the end for the insertion of a leaf-shaped piece of feathering that is tied to the butt in 3 places. All the archers would have worn the military equipment that can be seen on the 1st man, 2 crossed bands over the torso and a rectangular quiver fastened with a cord above the waist. The quiver is of a typical Old Kingdom kind. 3 and the crossed bands were part of every archer's uniform at the time. The date of the archer relief has been disputed by various scholars. Goedick, although well aware that the style matches the best examples of the 4th dynasty, was nevertheless inclined to assign the piece to the early 5th dynasty. 5 Smith, however, advocated a date in the reign of Khufu. 6 and Dorman followed, calling it a work of the 4th dynasty. 7 If we accept the 4th dynasty date, which seems probable, the question of placing the fragment in a specific monument still remains difficult. Ascribing the piece to Khufu's pyramid complex presents a problem, because its style is not exactly that of the reliefs securely assigned to this king's funerary monuments. Cat. Numbers 38, 41. The figures of the archers stand out harshly against their background, and the modeling of details, although of the first quality, lacks the subtlety and smoothness of the Khufu reliefs. The archer's facial features and ears are more deeply carved and more boldly, even naturalistically conceived. There are, however, other reliefs of Khufu's time whose style comes closer to that of the archer's scene. The fragment from the tomb of Heminu, Cat. Number 45, is a good example of this style, and even more closely related to the present work are the reliefs in the tomb of Khufu Khafai, who was a son of King Khufu. 8 Both tombs date from the end of Khufu's reign and their decorations embody a style bolder than that of the king's known pyramid complex reliefs. Can the archer's relief be assigned to an official's tomb that was decorated in this bolder style? To answer this question it is necessary to consider the iconographic context of the fragment. During the Old Kingdom the hunt with bow and arrow was a royal privilege in the Memphite region, and in reliefs of the period only the king himself is shown using this weapon. 9 The archers in the Metropolitan relief cannot, therefore, be identified as hunters. Moreover, the crossbands pictured here unquestionably indicate that the archers wearing them are not hunters but men engaged in a military campaign. They are thus part of the earliest battle scene known from the Old Kingdom. The other preserved battle scenes from the period date to the reign of Unis in the 5th dynasty and to the 6th dynasty. 10 The 5th and 6th dynasty scenes, however, present their martial theme with much less concision and monumentality than the archer's relief. Goedick has, therefore, correctly maintained that the archer's scene is by far the earlier version and that the others must be understood as dependent on it. 11 It is very unlikely that such an early prototype would have been carved in the tomb of a mere official rather than in a royal context. 2 possibilities for this context present themselves: the pyramid precinct of Khufu, for which it would have been produced by sculptors who practiced the bold style known from tombs of officials, or the pyramid temple or causeway of Khafra, the next king after Khufu who had his pyramid built at Giza. 2. Indeed, a relief block found in the debris of Khafra's valley temple shows a bound prisoner confronted by an Egyptian who wears the same cross bands as the archers on the Metropolitan relief. 13 As the block is known only from an old photograph, its style is difficult to judge, but it seems to show deeply carved eyes and ears and well-modeled features, especially in the captive's face. On the evidence of this block, then, we can tentatively assign the archer's relief to King Khafra's pyramid temple or perhaps his causeway. 14 We can also propose that the battle underway was probably a siege of an Asiatic fortified city because most later battle scenes employ archers in this context, leading the attack and providing protection for soldiers armed with axes, who are better equipped for hand-to-hand combat. 15 Since this appears to be the early depiction of a siege in Old Kingdom art, it is very likely that an actual historical event is shown. We do not know which of the fortified towns of early Bronze Age Canaan might be under attack. 16 But there can be no doubt about the pride with which the soldiers of the pharaoh are presented. As a formidable military machine, the men stand well aligned, their weapons poised in unison. 67. King Menkori and a Queen. In the evening, just before work stopped a small boy from the gang at the Thieves' Hole and stripper appeared suddenly at my side and said come. In the lower part of the hole the female head of a statue, 3/4 life size, of bluish slate had just come into view in the sand. It was too late to clear it, but immediately afterwards a block of dirt fell away and showed a male head on the right, a pair statue of king and queen. A photograph was taken in failing light and an armed guard of 20 men put on for the night. In those 5 sentences George Reisner related the discovery of one of the most important masterpieces of Egyptian sculpture, found in the Valley Temple of Menkori's pyramid, The statue was not in its original location and had probably been thrown there high tomb plunderers after the era of conquest. 2. In its size and majesty, the statue is comparable to the great seated statue of Khafra in the Egyptian Museum, Cairo, figure 28. But this king is not depicted in divine isolation. Although the base never had an inscription, the sovereign is unquestionably Menkore, whose face looks thinner than it does in other sculptures from Giza. Beside him is his principal wife, 3, probably Khmer and Nepti 2. 4. The two figures stand with their backs against a wide slab that comes to their shoulders. Treated as two juxtaposed individuals, they are joined by the affectionate gesture of the queen, who embraces her royal spouse. The pharaoh is adorned with the insignia of power, Neem's headcloth, here appearing without the uraeus cobra, revealing the natural sideburns, a false beard with horizontal striations, a plain shendi kilt fastened by a wide belt. His left leg forward, the monarch has his arms at his sides and each hand closed around an enigmatic object. The queen, slightly smaller than her spouse, is at his left, her left foot slightly advanced. Like goddesses and triad statues with Menkore, cat. Number 68. 5. She is wearing a long wig, but the artificial hair is smooth and reveals the natural hair, with its central part, on the temples and forehead. Wearing a sheer sheath, her left arm across her midriff in a pose seen in 3rd Dynasty statues, cat. Number 13. The queen has placed her left hand on Menkore's arm and is encircling his waist with her right arm. That attitude, which gives a new humanity to the royal couple, served as a model for private statuary. The simplicity of the forms and composition is combined with an extraordinary delicacy in the modeling of the body and an unmatched precision and indications of musculature. Although the treatment of the features is identical, compare, for example, the precisely outlined eyes and their naturalism, the carefully realized inflections of the mouths, and the firmness of the flesh. The two faces are individualized in the manner of portraits. The square, mature face of the king, who is turning slightly to the right, has a noticeably firm mouth, whereas the queen's face is all youthful roundness. Remnants of red paint still highlight the king's face, ears, and neck. The queen's hair still retains traces of black. Oddly, the work is unfinished, perhaps because of Menkore's premature death. His funerary complex was hastily completed. Only the faces and upper bodies received a final polishing. Below, the torsos display an irregular surface, and tool marks are visible on both bodies. Citing the severe features of Menkore, whom all abaster statues, cat. Number 70, in one of the triads show with full cheeks and a very round nose. Reisner attributed this masterpiece to the workshop of sculptor A. See Introduction to Cat. Numbers 56 to 63. Triad of King Menkore. Discovered by George Reisner in 1908, this statue depicts King Menkore flanked by two female figures. On his right stands the goddess Hathor, Lady of the Sycamore, identifiable by the cow's horn surrounding a sun disk that she wears on her head. On his left is the personification of the Nome, province, of Diospolis Parva, with the emblem of the goddess Bat above her head. Bat is depicted as a woman with cow's horns, whose face is resting on an elaborate knot. The three figures stand against the back slab that joins the base of the statue. All three are standing with their arms at their sides, and Hathor holds the king's right hand in her left. An enigmatic object, identical to those held by the named goddess, is visible in the sovereign's left hand. Menkore's left leg is advanced, and the walking pose traditionally reserved for male figures. He is wearing the shendi, or tripartite pleated royal kilt, and the white crown of Upper Egypt. No chin strap is visible. The treatment of the upper corners of the beard seems characteristic of the 4th dynasty. The two women are dressed in identical long, close-fitting sheaths, which partly reveal the details of their bodies beneath the sheer fabric. Each is wearing a tripartite wig with carefully incised locks. Despite their strong resemblance, a few differences are apparent. The left foot of the goddess Hathor is slightly advanced, and her face is turned to the side. The known goddess faces straight ahead, her feet together and arms at her sides, and she is wearing a necklace. The artist has rendered the shapes and musculature, especially of the king's torso and legs, with a great deal of care and has paid particular attention to the harmony of the composition. Enhanced by the stone a dark, perfectly polished greywack, this triac is one of the masterpieces of Old Kingdom sculpture. The group was found in the Valley Temple of Menkare along with 3 other complete triads and one that is fragmentary. One complete triad in the fragmentary group, figure 117, are housed in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. 2 other complete exemplars are in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Although very similar at first glance, the triads differ in a number of their details. The inside arms of the figures standing beside the king sometimes hang straight down but sometimes are wrapped around the king's torso, with the hand resting on his arm. The deities may hold either Shen signs or enigmatic objects in their hands. In the complete triad in Boston, the goddess Hathor is seated in the middle of the group, between the king and the name personification. Scholarly opinion about the number and purpose of these triads has changed since they were discovered. It was first thought that there must have been about 40 triads, one group for each Egyptian nome. Now it is supposed there were 8 triads in all, symbolizing the principal sites where the goddess Hathor was worshipped. 69. Head of Menkaure. The formal perfection of this head is only slightly compromised by its mutilation. This is very probably a portrait of Menkaure, depicted with the attributes of kingship, the white crown, symbolizing his power over Upper Egypt, and the false beard, traces of which are visible on the right side of the chin. The subtle modeling of the magnificently polished stone may well faithfully capture the features of the king. The impression of fatigue conveyed by the drooping lower lids and the heavy cheeks bordered by folds in the surface of the skin is belied by the firmness of the straight mouth. The eyes are treated naturalistically. There is no cosmetic line extending to the temples, no ribbon-shaped eyebrows, but simply an outline emphasizing the upper eyelids. The material, dimensions, and style of the work led Gilbert to link this head to a fragmentary triad in the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, figure IA7. It is now generally accepted that this triad depicted Menkaure between 2 figures, probably a goddess in the male personification of a province, or nome, of Egypt. 1 The Boston fragment, which is carved in a remarkable style, comes from the Valley Temple of Menkaure. It belongs to an extraordinary series of statues representing the pharaoh and the company of the goddess Hathor and a male or female nome deity, recognizable by the emblem worn on the head. This theme was repeated in statues of other Old Kingdom sovereigns. 4 admirable triads with Menkaure have been found intact at Giza. 3 of them, in the Egyptian Museum, Cairo, depict the king standing with Hathor on his right and on his left, respectively. The names of Thebes, J 40678, Sinopolis, J 40679, and Diospolis Parva, J 46499, Cat. Number 68, the 4th triad, in the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, 09.200, is dominated by a representation of Hathor seated between 2 standing figures, the king on her left and the goddess of the hair nome on her right. This series of triads is notable for the high slab against which the figures stand. Several fragments of similar groups were discovered in Menkaure's Valley Temple. We do not know how many there once were, perhaps more than 30, each corresponding to a different nome, or, according to current opinion, perhaps as few as 8, one in each of the chapels in the fore-temple, to represent the principal cities where Hathor was worshipped. The group to which this head belongs is distinguished by the splendid modeling of the goddess's body. She is standing to the right of the king and holding his hand. The king is also depicted standing, dressed in a shendi kilt with fine pleats. The 3rd figure has his arm around the king's shoulders. The subtle treatment of this male figure's bones and musculature, like the treatment of Menkaure's head, attests to the sense for sculptural form attributed to the workshop of sculptor B.C.E. Introduction to Cat. Numbers 56 to 63.